So, Raregroove, here we are,
Yeah.
Raregroove Connoisseurs Global Soul. Thanks for coming down.
No problem.
Thank you for DJing. Great set,
You're very
funky
welcome.
set. The roots of Raregroove. So, Tushan, for you, let's just start off. What would you say is your definition of Raregroove?
My definition of Raregroove, I think what I got into was the funky sevens. Really, it was sort of I was into hip hop at the time, so a lot of the breaks, the original breaks that were being played. That's what I sourced. I initially was funds being the way they were as a teenager. I sourced the Ultimate Breakbeat compilations, and then tried to source the originals from there. So from there, I got into a lot more jazz. And just started trying to track down the original tunes. I think the main place that really got me into Raregroove stuff was a place called Time Warp in Croydon, because I'm from South London. So Bill Shannon introduced me to a lot of stuff, but I also bought stuff from Bernard and Pop Beat, which I know that Barry Sharp used to buy from, and just people like Des Tushan today. I actually bought a couple of records that I played a couple of records that I bought from Des 20 years ago. So once you get the bug, you just start buying the tunes and then playing stuff out. But as a DJ, I played a lot more house music because that was more commercially viable for me to actually make money from DJing. But Raregroove was more of a personal love, and I used to play the odd house party for people who were into that sort of music.
And okay, so that's part of your journey. What is it about the music and this particular style of music that
I think
attracts you the most?
It's essentially sort of bass heavy music, and it's
you
a
have to
dance
start
music.
off the sentence with the question I asked, because in the documentary,
All right.
we won't hear me. So.
Yeah. So what's the question again?
What is it about this particular genre of music that attracts you, that draws you to the music?
It's the danceability to it, really.
Yeah, so you've got to say.
Oh, I see. What attracts me to it? So what attracted me to Raregroove was when I went to the first Raregroove parties I went to, and I saw dancers out there, and the vibe that was created by this type of music. And also it being obscure. A lot of people want to go to places to dance and hear a familiar sound. That was never for me. I always wanted to hear something new that I didn't know and discover, and then I'd rush the DJ booth to find out exactly what they were playing, especially when they played something that had a reaction from the crowd that I didn't know. And that was the sort of the exclusivity of it, and it being a bit more elusive. And generally all the kids I grew up with weren't into that type of music. They were into different genres of black music, but they weren't into that particular style of music, so it just made it a little bit more cool and exclusive.
So which clubs did you go to explore this music, and what would you say was around at the time that the Raregroove gave you a kind of alternative? If you can describe the two, like the stuff that all your friends were listening to, and then the stuff that you became, and which clubs were they going to, which clubs were you going to?
So very early on, the clubs that would do this music were the Mud Club at Busby's.
Can you say play Raregroove, because again
Right, yeah. So the clubs that would play Raregroove music were Mud Club at Busby's, and then the Raw Club on Tottenham Court Road. I forget the name of the nights, but there was always two rooms in the Raw, a larger room for more sort of commercial and up-to-date music, and the smaller room where the funky sevens and more Raregroove sounds got played. And it was just a different vibe. It was a more chilled out vibe, and very much driven by the dancers. And it was very much like what Paul Trouble Anderson used to do, which was play a record and the DJ would jump into the crowd and dance, and then go back and then change a record. It was a sort of a lot more freer, a lot less conformist. So anything went, and because Raregroove isn't really a genre as such, anything goes. So the artist could be, traditionally a rock artist or a pop artist, but they've made that one track which works in that atmosphere. And sometimes when you play those tracks out of context, if you just play the track, it doesn't really work. But then the good DJs know how to build the crowd up, drop that track, and then keep people dancing. And people don't even realise that what they're dancing to. A perfect example would be something like Cool Cat from Queen. And I've never really owned a Queen record apart from that track, but when I was first played that, I couldn't believe who it was. So there are lots of those sorts of things that you get introduced to through these parties. Later on in South London there was a DJ called Terry Mack, and he put on the I Ching parties, and it was sort of, we're talking about late 80s, early 90s. It just so happened that London Fashion Week had cottoned on to the Raregroove and boogie vibe, so I used to follow this sound around, and I got into some very exclusive places, and very, very good nights playing very, very good music. But the sort of Raregroove sound had changed from what Barry and Lascelles was playing to, including a lot more boogie, bearing in mind that by the late 80s, early 90s, with everyone being into house, a lot of early boogie and sort of latter day disco records were being forgotten, and they had some of that same sort of vibe, and they were being played a lot more often. Then as the sort of 90s progressed, I think it got very, very commercial with nights like Starsky and Hutch, where they just played straight 70s music, which wasn't really Raregroove at all, and people used to wear silly 70s clothes, and there was more of a sort of not a fun element to it, but more of a sort of cheese element to it, and that's when it sort of lost its way, I think. And then to find really good nights was becoming more and more difficult. But then it just so transpired that I had to sort of work for a living, so I couldn't go out midweek anymore, because that tends to be the only time when you could go to a good party was midweek, never on a Friday or a Saturday. The other obviously big influence was the bass clef. I went to see Norman J and also JM. He used to run a night called Quality Street, and again they used to play a bigger spectrum of what could be dubbed Raregroove music, introducing more of the two-step sounds, and also from growing up in South London, aware of the reggae sound systems like Ladies' Choice and the DJs like Mystery, I got introduced to a whole load of what I would call two-step, but is also called Raregroove, which I think is a bit of a misnomer, because that originally wasn't what Raregroove was about. But great sort of mellow two-step dance tracks, and just good music, really well-produced music, and again different. It's standout tracks, which got me to buy albums for one track, which I'm sure we're all guilty of.
So this was a question that I asked Sean on the last one. If you could define a mythological 7-inch that exists but you can't find it, what are all the elements, like one at a time, that you would want on that record that would fulfill you as a collector if you were the only person to find that one record?
So talking about a holy grail mythical record which has got all the elements of Raregroove, I would say definitely it has to be bass driven, heavy percussion, and for me personally, horns. So I do like that early 70s funk sound, and that to me, for me personally, that defines that Raregroove sound as sort of homage to JB, but you can tell it's definitely not JB, which there were literally scores of young kids in a lot of urbanized areas in America who wanted to make that sound, and it is their tracks which never really got any sort of promotion, were only sort of pressed 1,000 at a time, which make the bulk of our music that we listen to. So that would be for me the sort of holy grail of a record, and I'm sure that some of them have been, I'm sure most of them have been discovered, but if you think of how many people tried to make the record, if you look at the Northern Soul scene and how many records are being produced in very small quantities but are very, very, in their scene, very good, and the same applies to Raregroove and funk.
There's been a big conversation going on in the last few days about rarity versus groove. You've got the rare and you've got the groove. And my argument is that, you know, if a piece of music goes into what I call the Raregroove Hall of Fame, it doesn't have to be rare, it only has to have the groove. I mean, sometimes...
I think right, so the debate about Raregroove and rarity, it's an interesting one. When I was buying these records, and you've got to appreciate, this is before the internet, it's before Discogs. And if it wasn't in your R price, you had to search around a lot of record shops, go through a lot of vinyl, go through a lot of record fairs to get the one track you wanted. And I don't know about other people, but I always found, once I found the album I wanted, I used to see it everywhere. But before I had it, I never could find it. And yeah, it was a real labour of love. You could spend, you know, several hours in a record fair and come away with like 3-4 pieces that you found. And that, I guess, put the rarity on it. In terms of actual numbers, if it was released on a big label like Arista or Polydor, sure, they're not that rare because you can get the numbers, but then you've got to appreciate that these things were in, you know, warehouses for our price or Virgin, not seeing the light of day, and then would eventually sort of filter through. So that aspect of actually getting hold of the record was rare, but there are some records which are actually rare, pressed on very small independent labels. Usually the label was constructed by the artists themselves, and those things are rare in their own right. So no, it doesn't necessarily have to be rare, but what makes it rare is that people may even have these records in their collection and they never played them. And certainly talking to the DJs that sort of above my, you know, in the generation above, the disco guys and the jazz funk guys, they had music that I was playing and they didn't even know those tracks were on the albums that they had, because that's not what they were playing at the time. So it was something that evolved, and it was retrospective, but you know, a lot of the music we play now was not played at the time, only in very, very selected places. DJs like Trevor Shakes and I can't remember the name of the guy now, but those sorts of people. I mean, I've got no first-hand information of this. This is just from people I talked to. But there were very few people who played that sort of sound at the time it came out. But when disco took hold in the mid-70s, that tended to be, that was what was being played, that was what was commercial. And a lot of these tracks, which were still being made well into the early 80s with a funk sound, slightly slower, offbeat, syncopated beats, were still being made, but they were never commercially successful, neither here or in America. And that's what gives it the rarity angle. So it's not just about it, you know, it just, a lot of the rarity is the fact that a lot of these tracks are just not known. They're there in volume, but if you don't know it, you will pass it by when you're going through a load of record shows, which I have done, you know, on many occasions. I've gone back and then realised, oh, there's something on there.
Yeah, I think Andrew Sedman did a little piece about records that you wouldn't pick up in a charity shop because they got naff covers.
Yeah.
Could you cite a couple of examples of records that you've seen in charity shops loads and loads of times and suddenly realise there's one killer track on there? The charity shop phenomenon is something that relatively new for me, and I must admit I don't go traipsing around records as much as I would like to now, just with time constraints, and I do a lot of my shopping on the internet, which makes life a lot easier. But there's always things that you know, especially bands where you can't really sort of get the flavour of what's on the record. You have no idea. It's quite an obscure sort of thing, and or a lot of the time, sometimes things are just under plain cover because the cover's been lost, or you know, on some releases it was just a plain cover. One example would be a group called. Their name now, Marvin Holmes Justice. I think it was a reissue that was done, and that just came as a plain cover, and you just didn't know what this record was. The advantage of having a cover on a record and actually just looking at when you got the time, actually looking at, well, who produced it, you know, who are the musicians on it, and you could probably hazard a guess. In the days when you had record shops, they wouldn't allow you to play a record.
you just used to take a punt and hope that what you bought was okay, and if the price wasn't that expensive, then you were okay with it.
So, moving on from what you've just said, two questions. What is the best hit that you ever had from just buying blind and a record that looked interesting? And also, can you also tell us about your most exciting Holy Grail discovery or digging moment where you're in a shop, you play through some records, and you hit upon something that is just so special and to this day remains special?
I can't honestly think of a track which I've just picked up and thought, oh, that looks interesting. But certainly, I was in a record shop. It was under the Arches in Brixton Market, and there was loads and loads of records there, and it was just misfiled and all over the place. And there was this one track I pulled out, and I actually thought it was something else. It was a boogie tune called My Life by Joe Nash, which is a seriously rare record, which I didn't realise at the time. And I think I picked it up for 50p or something, and then amongst other things. And I thought it was Goldmine record. And I remember in my mind, oh, Goldmine records are always good to get hold of. And yeah, that was an amazing find for me that sticks out.
Okay, this is the untold story of Raregroove. I would like you to give me an untold story, something you've never told anyone, something that is to do with the scene, could be absolutely anything. As I said, we're going behind the scenes, digging that little bit deeper to find stories about the scene that have never been told before. It can be a personal experience, can be a digging trip, a discovery, a eureka moment that you've never shared with anyone, or even perhaps a record that is what I call personal ammo. It's one that you'd bring out in a clash that you've been saving for a long time, and something that maybe you know about.
So so the story of Untold Raregroove is there was a station called Eurojam, which I think you could only get in South London, like most pirate stations. And there was a DJ called DJ Barnes. I've never found out who this guy was, but he had a 2-hour show every Tuesday, and it would be such a cross-section of music, but there was a lot of funk and rare groove in it. But he used to start the show with house music, then he would get into funk sevens, and then he would get into jazz, and he'd finish up with what he called the ladies' choice, which was essentially two-step. And he was one of the few DJs who played across the spectrum, and very much I bought everything that I recorded from his shows, and that was my standpoint. So I'm into everything really, not just into one particular genre or one particular type of rare groove. And he played a track called I Can Deal With It by D. Edwards, and that was my moment. That really got me hooked onto that two-step sound. And incidentally, I bought it from Des a couple of years. It took me 2 years to track down, and I bought it from Des Tucson at a record fair at the old Paddocks Club in Holborn.
How much?
I paid, I think I paid £20 for it.
Good price.
Yeah, and that was in 1990. So I think I did well on that, and I've subsequently seen it go for a few hundred. So and my version is the one with strings. I know everyone likes the one without strings because it's apparently rarer, but I think that's the one I'm used to, and that's the one I hold dear. And it was one of those tunes that the moment I heard it, I thought, I've got to get this record. And the DJ annoying me, all I knew is it was I Can Deal With It, I Can Deal With It. And it was in the days where DJs wouldn't mention what it was, and you'd be singing a bad version to a poor record dealer for him to try and work out what it was. But Des knew exactly what I was talking about, because I guess there's not that many records would deal with it other than the Carolyn Franklin tune, which is a very different sort of tune, as in the title. But that was a really pivotal moment for me, hearing that record.
Apart from appearing in the documentary The Untold Story of Raregroove, we'll post the uncut rushes on Raregroove Connoisseurs as a bit of an exclusive. So you're one of the major contributors to the page, and I thank you very much for coming on there nearly every single day. I see some fantastic music posted by you. Could you just, first of all, could you just give us who are your favourite posters on the page?
Favourite posters are on the Raregroove connoisseurs page.
Directly into camera, because you've got to be talking directly to these guys. They're going to see it as an exclusive.
So my favourite posters on RGC, Christian Tilleray, Russell Mears, of course Shauna G, Lorraine, who's got her own page as well, and they're the sort of consistently the people on point, and also Paul Butcher. But they're very much, Christian and Russell certainly are like me. They like the jazzier end, the funkier end, the things are a bit more left field, which a lot of people wouldn't necessarily play. And a lot more sort of experimental, and again, those tracks taken out of context don't work, but if you played them in a selection they really would work, and you would see it when the people dance.
So what you're saying is that it's the construction of the set, because this is an argument or it's a discussion that I always get into, which is Raregroove is not about the rarity. It's about the ride that the DJ takes the dancers.
Precisely.
In fact, it's about the dancers on the dance floor. Without the dancers, we just would not have the genre.
I think the selection is the most important, because you could have a track at the beginning of the selection, a track at the end of the selection. They're both great Raregroove tracks, but you couldn't put them together. You have to have the stuff in the middle. So, and I think that's what makes a great DJ, and they're few and far between people who can really shift tempo, shift mood. I mean, there's some guys with really great collections who just will go from theme and subject and you know go from a sort of you know, not just love songs but sort of political messages, and just take you on a very inspirational journey. But you need a lot of records to do that.
So could you sum it up with your personal definition of Raregroove?
My definition of Raregroove would be certainly a funky beat, danceable music, okay, and original music, things which don't sound like anything else. You know, I mean, the two-step sound is very similar to a point, but you know, Raregroove tracks can be very, very different. But they work together. When you put them together in a selection, it works. And as a genre, it works because there's nothing else like it.
So actually, in fact, something sparked off in my head that what you're talking about is actually not only taking people on a ride, but also painting a picture. It's the light, and it's the dark, and it's the shade, and it's the bright, and it's lifting people on the dance floor, taking them down. So that's quite interesting, because you know, I'm thinking of something like Larry Young's Fuel, which there's no other track like it. And to me, that epitomizes Raregroove. It's where you hit the sweet spot, but it's the originality of the groove as well, with the syncopation, with the bass line, maybe some little quirky thing which takes it off in a different dimension. So to me, it's interesting you said that. It is like painting a picture. You know, you can't just paint it all in blue or, you know, all in red. There's got to be all the colours of the rainbow and the shades, from dark black to the bright light.
Yeah.
Anything you'd like to add? Any messages? Because as I said, it's going out to Raregroove connoisseurs. If you'd just like to finish with a message to the page.
Well, it's a great page. I've learned a lot of music from it. I really thought I knew my biscuits, but clearly I was proved wrong. There's a lot of stuff out there, and I'm sure there's a lot more stuff out to discover. So keep sharing, keep scouring YouTube and finding things, and please do come and attend the RGC all days, because if it gets big enough, you know, we can make it more of a thing, and they'll probably hire a club venue somewhere and get things going.
Thank you very much. Really appreciate your time. Peace and love. We're out of here.